Hi, I'm Rabbi Jeremy from Mahar, and this is the second Hanukkah candle lighting video for 2024 holidays, the 2024 holiday season. And yesterday I mentioned that we kind of add candles, and so you can see on the right side I've got the two, and I went this way, and we'll light them that way. Like I mentioned last time, that's kind of the traditional practice. So here is our menorah, and here's what we're going to talk about today. What is the background of the Hanukkah story, and why continue to celebrate it as modern, pluralistic, humanistic Jews? So the overall Hanukkah story is a mixed bag. The traditional version of it that we receive, and we see this in the Talmud, this is kind of the first place we see this particular version of the story, is the Greeks took over the temple in Jerusalem, and with God's help, the Maccabees were able to retake that temple. But when they got in there and they were rededicating and cleaning and all of that other stuff, they discovered that there's not enough oil for more than 1 day's worth of light in the menorah, the big oil lamp that was in the temple. And so they said, well, we got to do it. So they light them. And then turns out that the candles, that the oil that's used, it lasts for 8 days. And so Hanukkah is 8 days, right? That's the story that the rabbis preserve in the Talmud. I'm not a big adherent to the idea that 1 day's worth of oil lasts 8 days. Is it so difficult to get olives to press for olive oil? I don't know. We'll explore that some other way, I guess. But I'm not a huge fan of that version of it because it sort of beggars belief that the oil lasts that long, and it leaves out some really important details about what we do know about this time period. And one of the things that we do know about this time period is that the people who were the Maccabees were religious conservatives. And yes, they were opposed to the Greeks who had kind of despoiled the temple, but the Greeks despoiled the temple in part because there was internal strife between different groups of Jews, and it was interfering with tax collection, which is what any ancient world monarch actually cares about. They want to make sure they get their taxes paid. And it was kind of the habit of Greek rulers that if you were paying your taxes and you weren't causing problems, they weren't going to get involved. And so Hanukkah is, the Hanukkah story is this really unusual example of a Greek monarch actually getting mad and actually intervening in religious practices of the Jews. So there's kind of three sets of actors. There are these Greeks, there are these more traditional Jews, and then there are these Hellenizing Jews. And the real issue for us as modern Jews is that in the United States, 70% of us are connected to the liberal Jewish denominations, if we have a membership in a congregation at all. We're connected to these liberal denominations, and these liberal denominations look a lot more like Hellenizing Jews than they do the Maccabees. And so this really complicated story actually involves a lot of infighting between different groups of Jews. So Hanukkah is kind of an odd holiday for us as moderns to celebrate because we're a lot more like the Greek-aligned Jews than we are the more traditionally aligned Jews in most places in the United States. Israel's religious makeup is a different question. Orthodox Judaism is a different question, but for even conservative Jews, for the most part, we look a lot more like these kind of Hellenizing Jews from the ancient world. And that makes celebrating Hanukkah actually kind of complicated when you stop and think about it. Why are we celebrating this holiday that really, the story that it's celebrating is not about the 70-odd% of American Jews who are not Orthodox? What in the world do you do with this holiday? I mean, one part of it is you can just say, look, this is a tradition. We do it because it's the tradition and we feel connected to it. And that's a perfectly legitimate thing. Some people would say, look, it's the holiday that's closest to Christmas. Also legitimate. You know, competition's a thing, right? We have kids, our kids see other people celebrating this other holiday, and do you want to be left out? It's very common for there to be winter holidays in every tradition all over the world because it's dark and you want some light, and winter holidays bring some light. And how do they bring the light? Menorah, Christmas trees, right? Candles on Christmas trees. So we have a winter holiday that's part of Judaism, and we can pull it in. And we don't always tell the story so accurately, right? We kind of spin the dreidel, we eat latkes, we eat sufganiyot, right? Israeli fried donuts, right? Oil-based foods, and kind of remembering the oil story when we do that. But the Hanukkah story doesn't necessarily represent us. But to be fair, Sukkot doesn't necessarily represent us either. And Hanukkah is actually sort of a replacement for Sukkot when it starts. So the story that we have is that the Maccabees make it into Jerusalem. They take the temple. They purify the temple. The story about the 8 days of oil is not part of this story. This story happens to come from older texts. The Maccabees make it into the temple, purify the temple, and they want to mark it with a holiday. And the closest holiday, the closest one that they had missed celebrating at the temple, was Sukkot, right? This holiday that today we think of as you're out in these huts or these booths, and you're not really living in there all the time. And also most Jews don't engage in harvest kinds of activities, which is really what Sukkot is connected to, as the harvest and the rainy season and all these other things. But Sukkot's the closest holiday. So they decide to celebrate Sukkot. Biblical calendar, Sukkot has 7 days, except it kind of has an 8th day. So there are 7 days of Sukkot, and then there's a holiday called Shmini Atzeret. Shmini Atzeret means like 8th day of assembly. We don't actually know what Shmini Atzeret is for, but we know that Shmini Atzeret is there, and we know that it's kind of like the close to Sukkot. And so Hanukkah is 8 days because they're marking Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret as the closest holidays that they had missed before they took over the temple. Right? There's about a 2-month space between the end of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret and the beginning of Hanukkah. It's a little more than that, but it's not much. And so Hanukkah becomes 8 days because of that, not because the oil lasted 8 days. We first get that story in 500 CE. We're getting the story about 8 days worth of Hanukkah much earlier. 1st century BCE, maybe 2nd century BCE. It's hard to date these ancient texts, but it's a lot earlier than we're getting the story of the oil, so probably more reliably accurate on a historical level. So that's why 8. And that's a little bit about the history and why it's sort of weird that as moderns we celebrate this holiday that, they really wouldn't have liked us very much, the people whose actions created this particular holiday. So, I'm going to light our menorah, and we'll call it a night for tonight, our second night of Hanukkah in 2024. Shamash is lit, and we light the newest first, and then the one from the day before, and we say our blessing, Nivarech et haor ba'adam, Nivarech et haor ba'olam, Nivarech et haor ba'adam, Nivarech et haor shel Hanukkah. Let us bless the light in the world. Let us bless the light in humanity. Let us bless the light of Hanukkah. Tomorrow's program is going to be on Shabbat, falls on Shabbat. So keep an eye out for that link and join us.